Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is your remote workforce, home setups, tech tips, and cybersecurity. Thank you so much to Carmen on the Lakes Region Chamber who understood the need for this consulting and really acted quite fast to make it all happen. My name is Ryan Robinson. I'm the Chief Service Officer at Mainstay Technologies, and I'm a Lakes Region guy myself, live in Laconia, and so I may know many of you who are joining us today. And if you're not familiar with Mainstay, we are an IT services and information security services firm. And we've been helping organizations for years now to move to fully remote workspaces. We have a number of clients who have remote offices all over the country, or their whole business is just individuals working from home. So this has been something that we've been prepping for years, although certainly we did not know it would come to this, and this is an unfortunate way for many organizations to have to move into being fully remote so quickly. But that is part of what we do in our business. So given the nature of this webinar format, what I'm going to do is when I give in-person presentations, I love to answer questions and have sort of Q&A as we go. But just given the nature of this format, what I'd request is that you actually type in your questions as we go, but we'll wait to answer those questions until the end, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. Also, don't stress about taking notes. We can send notes to anyone and send detailed notes as well to anyone who requests them. So you can see on your screen there that our communications manager, Corey Hoyt, you see his email address here, choyt@mstech.com. And so you can just email him directly. Let him know that you are interested in getting the notes, and we will send those to you. I should also mention that I've had for months now a little tickle in the back of my throat, and so I am going to cough. Usually it doesn't manifest itself unless I am talking a bunch, and so if I'm talking here for the next hour, I'm sure I'm going to cough a bunch of times. I will try to keep it to a minimum, but don't worry, I don't believe I have the coronavirus. It's just a tickle in the back of my throat, and my apologies in advance for you having to hear my cough. So our goal today is really to give you a kind of playbook with very actionable, practical steps that you can take to turn your organization into a fully remote organization, essentially overnight. And ultimately, we're in a situation where we have to adapt fast. The coronavirus has really changed the market dramatically, just in a matter of days. I mean, you think about the fact that it was only, 2 weeks ago that on a Sunday evening, we all found out that the schools in New Hampshire were going to be closing. And so quite literally overnight, people had to figure out how they were going to change to this new environment. How are they going to handle with their, kids being home? They were going to have to go home. Even though we have not had an official shelter-in-place demand in New Hampshire, still many organizations are needing to move to this remote structure and do so very, very quickly. Now, the good news in this is that the market has been step by step, the technology has been moving towards enabling a remote workforce for years. You think about the proliferation of mobile devices, the fact that we have cloud-hosted infrastructure and applications and increased internet bandwidth. I mean, where would we be had this crisis undertaken us or overtaken us in 1980, right? The challenge, though, is that many businesses that maybe have access to the technology or the resources, they still may lack things like the proper remote access tools. They may lack necessary cloud-hosted, accessible anywhere applications and data. They may lack either the virtual communication tools to utilize in their business to interact with each other and on their teams or with their clients, or maybe they have access to those tools, but they've just not had the proper training, and so their team doesn't know how to really use them. Organizations may lack the proper security layers and protocols to shift into this fully remote environment. They may lack the cultural buy-in. There's still plenty of organizations, and I think oftentimes for very good reason, who have resisted moving to remote because they want to have that physical interchange with their customers, physical interchange with their teams. And so a lot of people have pushed this off, and I think in many respects, oftentimes there are very good reasons to do that. The challenge, though, that we're facing is that we don't have the option at this point. Even prior to a shelter in place, we don't have the option because many of our employees have to be at home. And then when a shelter in place is put in, then certainly, I should say if, maybe we'll never have one in New Hampshire, but if it is put in place, then overnight, many people who are now still commuting back and forth to the office or to work are going to not have a choice to do so. Now you might say, well, maybe, excuse me, there it is. I'll try to take water as we go. You may think, well, my business is considered an essential infrastructure business. And so even if we have a shelter in place, we'll still be able to function. But if you actually look at the guidelines, if you look at how those guidelines are written and enforced, written by the Department of Homeland Security, as well as how they are enforced in other states, it's not just the case that if you are in an essential company, that means that you're going to be able to simply go to and fro as you please, because some of the language, for instance, here's a direct quote from the Department of Homeland Security. Workers, quote, workers should be encouraged to work remotely when possible and focus on core business activities. In-person, non-mandatory activities should be delayed until the resumption of normal operations, end quote. So there's still an expectation that even if you're an essential company, there may be certain functions within your company that should still stop or be delayed while this is all happening. So ultimately, we have to adapt. As small businesses, medium-sized businesses, we have to adapt fast. The situation we're in, you think about when the meteor hit, millennia ago, it's like you either go extinct, you adapt slowly, which means you're probably going to go extinct, just take a little longer to get there, or you adapt fast. And that's really the situation that we're all in. So what I want to do is walk through the playbook for enabling a remote workforce. This playbook really consists of three primary objectives. First is proper technology, having the proper technology tools to make a remote workforce a possibility. Two is having appropriate security layers and workflows. So in other words, it's not just about having the right tools. You have to be able to manage those tools effectively and securely. And I'll talk a little bit more about security later, but we are in a pivotal moment where companies are playing fast and loose with security, and this is one of the most important times for them to focus on it. And then cultural intentionality. It's not just about having the tools and then using them remotely and using them securely, but it's also about making sure that we can still have great company cultures, that we can still cultivate our relationships with each other, our relationships with our clients and our customers. And so we have to be all the more intentional now more than ever. So that's the playbook, and I want to talk through sort of the individual plays within each of these categories. So let's start with proper technology. So for most organizations, whether you're small, medium, or large, there's a very good chance that you have a lot of local infrastructure at your physical office. Now, some of the folks represented here, unquestionably, are sole proprietors who don't have a local server or have a kind of business class network. But many of you do. And so for those of you who are sole proprietors and maybe don't even have a physical office, obviously moving to remote is a very different animal for you, and probably is going to be easier in many respects. But for those of you who do have an office infrastructure, it probably looks something like this. You have a server environment, that physical box that sits in the server room. You have applications, individual either line of business applications or just core applications like the Microsoft Office suite, those kinds of things. You have individual endpoints, which endpoints are computers, basically. Computers, tablets, smartphones, anything that you are using to access the information on those applications or in the server environment. Then you have monitors, so you have computer screens, individual peripheral devices, wireless keyboards and mice and printers and copiers and all that. You have phones, and then you have other communication tools that you utilize. So really what you need to do is rethink each of those items and say, all right, how do we have a remote server environment or utilize what our server is giving us in a remote fashion? How do we have cloud-hosted applications that are accessible anywhere? Do we have a bunch of desktop computers that are not very mobile friendly and we need to move them to a mobile friendly structure? What about our monitors and peripheral devices? Are these things that we can fully take with us to our homes? Do we need to rethink how we're doing that? Do we need to eliminate some of them? Phones, how are you going to connect with your clients and your team? Most likely phones you use internally and externally. So you're going to have to rethink how you have those phone systems. And then communication tools, either you're going to need to get communication tools that you don't have, or you're going to need to learn how to utilize them better. So I want to go through in a little more detail each one of these categories. So for servers, start there. So servers, all a server is just basically a big computer. A server is just a computer with a different kind of operating system that will either, excuse me, either allow you to host applications on a server, host files or other kinds of data, or provide individual services like security services to the individual computers in your environment. So ultimately, you have three options when you want to move from a local server option to being able to be a fully remote workforce or a partially remote workforce. Option one is you move, and this is the left column there, you move to cloud-hosted servers. Option two is you move to a serverless environment altogether, where you move all of those key elements that your servers are providing you and you move those to cloud-hosted resources. Or the third option is you stick with your local server that you have currently, and you just make sure that you have appropriate secure remote access to that server that's back at the office. So we'll talk through each one of those. So for cloud-hosted servers, what that basically means is that you take those physical boxes that you have, and instead of having those physical boxes that you own, you rent out space in physical data centers. That's what the cloud is. A lot of times the cloud is a term that gets bandied about and people don't necessarily have a real clear vision of what it means. All the cloud is it's instead of having physical hardware that you own, you simply move the data and applications and things that are on that server, and you move those to data centers in which you have a data center will have many hundreds, oftentimes thousands sometimes, of those physical boxes all lashed together in a very redundant, secure way, and then you're accessing those resources over the internet. So if you have a local server, and for those of you who maybe have a 5-year-old server that you are going to replace anyway, server host, this is can be a great time to think about cloud-hosted infrastructure, because you've already sort of utilized up all that investment. So you have two options when you go into cloud-hosted infrastructure, either the private cloud or the public cloud. Private cloud just means companies like Rackspace and other data centers that are independently owned. The public cloud means that you utilize some of the big players in the data center space. So Microsoft, Amazon, and Google are the three biggest, and either use Microsoft's Azure platform, Amazon's AWS or Amazon Web Services platform, or Google's Google Cloud. We're big fans of Microsoft because most organizations, especially if they're businesses, are in the Microsoft ecosphere already. And so there's a lot of advantages of staying in that ecosystem. And if your IT provider, excuse me, has already said, oh yeah, we're already in the cloud, you already have servers in the cloud, it's worth asking whether you're in the private cloud or the public cloud, because what we've seen is sometimes IT providers will take a server and then shove it into their own server rack at, back at their office or something. That is not the cloud. That is not a data center. But sometimes it gets referred to as such. So it's worth asking IT if they're already saying you're cloud hosted, where that actually lives. You can gain a lot of cost benefits from the public cloud, and a lot of security and business continuity benefits by being in data centers as well. So your second option is, let's say that you're in a dynamic where you want to be remote ready, accessible anywhere, and there's a possibility you might not need a server at all. This is most likely the scenario if you have individual applications that have cloud-hosted options. So an example, like if you utilize QuickBooks in your business, and you can instead utilize QuickBooks Online, which is hosted by Intuit, who's the vendor for QuickBooks, then that allows you to take that, remove that from your local server, and now you have one less thing you need that server for. And if you can continue to go through your applications, and if there continues to be cloud-hosted options for them, then that will help you eliminate altogether. If you're a nonprofit and you use Blackbaud, you can move it to the NXT platform, which is what their moniker for their cloud-hosted solution. So, and even if you say, oh, well, we utilize this line of business application that we have locally hosted, and there's not even a cloud-hosted option for you, don't necessarily assume that it's out of the question for you to move to a serverless environment, because there might be a different application alternative that is really worth looking at. Maybe you've even thought of before, and now it could make good economic and practical sense to really dive into that and make that migration and make that transition. If you want to go serverless, you're also going to have to look at file hosting. So most local servers are going to have what's called a file server on those local servers. And you're going to need to offshore those to the cloud as well. And so the big options there, big three options, are Microsoft's OneDrive solution, Dropbox for Business, or ShareFile, which is a Citrix solution. Each of those have their own pros and cons. One of the pros, though, of Microsoft OneDrive is that most of you probably are already paying on some level. If you have some basic level Microsoft licensing already, you may be getting OneDrive for free, and so you can utilize that very inexpensively. Even if you need higher levels of storage and so on, it can be often less expensive to move up plans, move up licensing structures versus moving into one of those other solutions. And those are great. I mean, for anyone who has used those before, it's very intuitive. With OneDrive, for instance, you open files using the same Windows Explorer box that you open files on that are on your local drives on your computer or in a local server. So very user-friendly. They've come a long way over the years. Now, your server also provides additional services. A lot of them are related to security. So for instance, account management and permissions, those are often something that your server does for you. Some of you may have heard of the term domain controller before. Often local servers will have a domain controller, almost always, that will manage your accounts and make sure that people logging in have access to only the things they ought to have access to and so on. But there are cloud-hosted services for that as well. So for instance, Azure Active Directory is a service that can provide that. And there's other mobile device management platforms as well that, that will allow you to get a lot of the same security functionality even without having that local server. Okay, so that's option 2. Option 3, some of you may be in a situation where, look, let's say you just bought that server host last year and you don't want that, that investment to go to waste. And so you're going to need to stick with that local server potentially. If you do, that's fine. You just need to make sure that you are accessing that server remotely in a very secure way. And so there's a couple options for that. Utilizing something called VPN technology, or virtual private networks, basically creates, you could say, an encrypted secure tunnel from your home office to your actual business office, and makes it so that you are effectively in the office without being there. You have access to the same network resources, same services from your server, and so on. Another option for remote access is using something called remote desktop services. That's where you would log in to let's say a computer that you have at your home, and then you remote into your computer at the office, which then accesses those network resources. VPN tends to be better if you can move to it, but in either case, either one of them are legitimate and fine to use. The one thing to be careful of, though, is you really should have what's called multi-factor authentication that surrounds both of them. Multi-factor authentication simply means that when you are logging in, let's say you are opening up your VPN client to log into that so that you can access all of the resources from your local server. When you log in, you should not only have to put in a password, but you should have to put in some sort of secondary code that is sent, let's say, to your smartphone when you try to log in, or click a button in a smartphone application that allows you to get in. And that secondary form of authentication means that in order for someone to get in to your network remotely, they not only have to have your password, which is something that can be known, something that can be stolen, something that someone might trick you into giving to them, or that they could crack with a free password cracking tool online. But now they also have to have stolen your smartphone, right? And so that increases your security substantially. So make sure that if you're using one of those remote access technologies, that you're also using multi-factor authentication along with that. And if you don't, you should be talking to IT and asking them to implement that kind of a solution. All right. So let's talk about now mobile-friendly endpoints. Endpoints, again, is just a fancy way of saying the devices that you use to access applications or other data. Now, in a word, what this means for remote workers is laptops, moving from desktops to laptops. What you want to do if you move there, if you're able to get laptops in short order, and some of you may already have laptops in place, but if you're able to get them in short order, what you want to do is work with your IT partner to ensure a few things. First of all, those laptops should be what are classified as business class laptops. Business class laptops are opposed to the kinds of machines you might get at Best Buy or Staples. They have solid chassis so that they'll last longer, more durable. They have all the proper ports so that you can connect to, dual monitors or additional peripheral devices that you need. And they also don't have any adware or bloatware that are software applications that sit in the background on those machines and often supply private data back to the vendor or other advertising companies. Those adware and bloatware are big security potential risks for you. And when you go down to Best Buy and you think, oh man, this computer is cheaper than what I can get through IT or whatever, that can often be because those it's supplemented by the revenue that's being generated by that adware or that bloatware. So you really want to get business class machines. Also make sure you have proper warranties. 3-year warranties are standard in our industry. You think about a computer is like, a hammer to a carpenter. If most folks in professional services and many other industries utilize their computer, 8 hours a day sometimes. And so you want to make sure that they're able to get back up and running, and solid warranties will give next day pro support so you can make sure your team is up and running very quickly. And you also want to think about, on that same token, getting some spare machines. So the industry standard is 3 to 5% of your fleet should be a backup machine. So if you have 100 computers, then you should have 3 to 5 spare laptops at any given moment to be able to roll out to your team so that they can be up and running very quickly when it's a scenario where like they need the computer in a half hour or an hour, not next day it gets fixed, and maybe it gets fixed and maybe it doesn't. Now I'm saying this all to you at a very ironic time because I'm telling you to get laptops in a moment when the demand is incredibly high for laptops for the exact reasons I'm saying, because of this remote access capability, but also because the supply chains are weak right now because of the coronavirus. So desperate times call for desperate measures. If you are in a situation where you just can't get a laptop and you can't get it from your IT provider, then you may be able to do one of these 3 options. Okay, option 1 is you can bring home a desktop computer, right? A desktop is different from a laptop in the sense that, a desktop is that bigger machine that usually sits under your desk or on your desk and then has appropriate ports to connect to your monitors. But you can bring your desktop machines home. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The one thing you have to realize though is if you bring your desktop home, desktop machines don't necessarily have wireless built into them. They don't have wireless cards built in. And so you're not going to just be able to bring your desktop home, set it up, and be connected to the internet with no problem. You may have to take an Ethernet cable and connect that from your desktop computer down to your router, your internet router. And that may be far away. You may have a home office upstairs and your router's down in the basement. So you may need to get, a 50-foot, 70-foot, 5-foot, 100-foot Ethernet cable if you're going to be able to do that. So just remember, you're going to need that cable. There's a very good chance. You could also get an external wireless card to put into your desktop. The problem is those are very hard to find right now for obvious reasons because a lot of people are trying to buy them. Option 2, if you can't get a laptop right now, you can go down to the store, retail store, and buy a non-business class machine. The only thing I would caution you on is, other than what I had already mentioned, is you need to remember, make sure you get the appropriate specs. The best way to understand what specifications you need is to understand what your individual applications require. So if you're an engineer working on CAD machines, you're going to need much higher levels of memory and processing power and all of that, different hard drives potentially. And so make sure you work with IT to ensure that you have appropriate specs. Make sure you have the right ports. We've seen this happen where people will go buy a machine at Staples and then they realize when they get it home, oh shoot, I can't attach my dual monitors because it doesn't have the appropriate ports. Same thing with other peripheral devices. So be careful on that one. Also look to make sure you have the right video card. Different software applications require different levels of video card capability. And a lot of like applications will not render things appropriately if you don't have the right video card, or the application won't run at all. Also look for the warranty length and coverage, like I had mentioned before. And then also look at the return policy. Make sure, a lot of companies right now are tightening their return policies, and you don't want, if you get misled by, IT sends you in the wrong direction, or you just make a mistake somewhere along the way, you want to be able to bring that machine back. Last option, and it's last for a reason because it's the worst of the three options, is using a home computer. I'd strongly encourage you not to use a home computer. If you can at all help it. But if you have to, make sure that it's managed and monitored by IT. So make sure that, whatever monitoring software or centrally managed, centrally managed antivirus or web and URL filtering, make sure that that is on those individual devices, because you don't want those rogue, especially if you're having to do any kind of remote access where they are connecting to your business network. And even if they're just connected to applications that have sensitive data, you really want those to be safe and secure and managed and monitored. And they also should not ever be shared with any non-employees. So never let your husband, your wife, your teenage son, like, don't let people use it, because they may not have, there may be challenges there where they download some free, screensaver, not thinking much of it, and that, downloads a keylogger onto your computer that someone can basically see what you're typing when you're typing passwords into your bank accounts. I mean, you just don't want to let other people use that while you're using it for work purposes. All right, let's talk about peripheral devices. There's a lot of peripheral devices out there, but I just want to talk about two. The peripheral devices simply means, a device that you connect to that computer to be able to do some other function. So the number one peripheral device that I want to encourage you to utilize is something called a docking station. So if you look at your screen there, at the bottom right of the computer monitor, you see a little black box. Those small black boxes are the size and shape of like an external hard drive. That's what a modern day docking station looks like. Some of you might have used docking stations in the past where they're like a tray and you set it on a tray. That's not the modern docking stations. What these are is they allow you to have multiple ports, multiple additional ports that your laptops may not come with. And this also solves the problem if you get a laptop without appropriate kinds of ports. And they also, some of those ports will be like video ports. So if you have, let's say, two external monitors and one is VGA and one is DisplayPort or one's HDMI, they'll have multiple options so you can make sure that all of your monitors are plugged in. If you have a wireless mouse and keyboard, those can all be plugged into that. And the nice thing about the docking station too is that the newer ones will actually allow you to power your laptop from one single cord as well as everything else. So instead of plugging a bunch of things into your computer every time you sit down at your docking station, you plug in one cord. It'll have all of your ports, all of your peripherals plugged in, and give you power all at the same time. Now, the second kind of peripheral device I want to mention are printers, copiers, and scanners, those kinds of devices. We're in an interesting situation right now where a lot of organizations have been wanting to move to paperless for a long time, but have not had the cultural buy-in. Have had certain individuals within the company that just really love printing their emails or whatever, and it's been a challenge. This is a kind of a one silver lining moment in this, is that we can move to paperless and really have a very valid reason to push and get people there very quickly in a way that's been hard in previous years. So I would encourage you to avoid getting printers, copiers, and scanners like the plague. If this is a great opportunity to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to use our smartphones to scan documents. We are going to, decide not to print. We're going to have a single person, let's say, that does all the printing for certain things and only equip them with a printer instead of everyone having one on their desk, that kind of thing. Now, there may be employees, though, that require them, and that's fine. Only thing is, just don't skimp on cost at the moment if you do, because you're going to spend more time on technical support and frustration and paper and ink and all of that if you go cheap on those peripheral devices. We often have clients who spend a lot of money taking care of printers that they really don't need, just because they've bought very inexpensive ones, and they end up paying more for support costs than if they just would have bought a really high quality one. And when you want to equip a user with a great home setup, this is a great opportunity to do that. Okay, let's talk about communication tools. I have no doubt that some of the folks here joined specifically to talk about this exact thing. We're going to look at 4 different categories of communication tools. First, we're going to look at phones, then something called unified communications, video conferencing platforms, and then voice platforms. So for phones have evolved over the years. You know, it used to be we'd have those old copper line phones. That migrated to having on-premise digital phone systems. In recent years, many organizations have moved to voice over IP or VoIP phones, which essentially means that you're getting your phone service over the internet instead of over the old phone lines themselves. And then more recently, we've developed into having what's called unified communication. So let's start talking about phones proper. The best, if you want to be living in a remote only or a mostly remote scenario, and yet you still need to have a good phone system, you really want to be in either two categories. Either one, be in cloud hosted VoIP or in unified communications. And I'll talk more about unified communications in a minute. But cloud hosted VoIP basically means that you're getting your phone service over the internet, but also the phone service itself is serviced by a company remotely, and all of that service is provided by that company via the internet. So basically what that means is, let's say that you have those physical, you're using a physical handset. If you take that physical handset and you have VoIP, cloud-hosted VoIP, what you can literally do is take your phone set, unplug it from your wall, bring it home, plug it back in at home, and you are exactly in the same situation as you would be at work. All the same call trees look the same. All of the workflows look the same. The way you access and the way you utilize it is all exactly the same. It doesn't matter where you are. So cloud-hosted VoIP is a great option. Some of you may already have cloud-hosted VoIP and not realize that you can do that you could literally just take that home. But that's an option. Also, if you have cloud-hosted VoIP, you can utilize, instead of utilizing the hard phones at all, you can utilize something called soft phones, which are not just same things, but just with softer material. Soft phones mean that you are using a software application on your computer to do all of your calling and to dial the numbers and so on. So it's really the same thing as using a hard phone. The big difference is this: you'd use a headset instead of grabbing a handset and holding it up to your ear. Some people just like the feeling of phones. They like seeing a phone. It gives them comfort. They've been using it a long time. But if you think about it, a phone is you're just repeating another computer, because a phone is a computer. It's just a computer on a different device. But you can save costs by utilizing a soft phone and getting that application, and then you can dial the numbers through that soft phone. You can do all the same functionality. It's a mental shift, but really a very easy, it can be a tough mental shift for people, but really it's a very easy practical shift. Once someone uses a headset for a minute, they're like, oh, this is better. I can hear better. I don't have to hold something. And once people have utilized a soft phone and press the buttons there, they end up actually being able to make that shift very, very quickly and easily. So if you already have VoIP, talk to your provider about utilizing soft phones. Now, unified communications is the next option. So it's sort of an overlap. If you want to utilize your be remote for phones, you can use unified communications just for phones, or you can use it for actually all the platforms we're going to talk about today. So unified communications basically means where you have all of your communication, so instant messaging, screen sharing, video sharing, phones, you name it, all on a single platform. There are some unified communications platforms where you can have integrated, you can have multiple systems integrated into one, but the best ones are the ones where it's one single platform. And the best example that we've seen of that is Microsoft Teams. Many organizations already have licensing. If you have Microsoft licensing already, you may be already paying for Teams. But what Teams does is, within a single application, again, you can have your instant messaging, you can have your screen sharing, you can have your video sharing, and you can have your phone system all running off that. So it's like that, having that soft phone and having all those other tools in one. Typically, it's less expensive if you move to unified communications than having each of those, paying separate vendors for each of those. And the only thing that can be more costly is just the headset itself. If you want to make sure you have a really good quality headset that's compatible with the system, then that's the only thing you're going to probably spend more money on. But again, excuse me, over the life of your usage, it's still most likely going to be significantly less expensive. So highly recommend Microsoft Teams and unified communications. It's sort of the dream of where phones have tried to get to for many years. And thankfully, with this change, in a sense, a lot more people, a lot more organizations are going to be open to making that migration. Okay, video conferencing tools. Video conferencing is going to be all the more critical in the coming days, weeks, and months. And if you were one of those people who was fortunate enough to have invested in like Zoom, one of the platforms, that those are probably the only stocks that are performing well right now. So you're probably in pretty good shape. It's critical. Using video is going to be more and more critical as we are not able to have those in-person interactions that we've been so used to. And seeing the human face makes a difference. You look at advertisements. Advertisements, how often do they have just a photo of the thing that they're trying to sell? No, they almost always will have a photo with the thing they're trying to sell along with someone holding it. Someone, the human mind is drawn to the human face. And that's how we can make connections, how we look people in the eyes. So I want to go over a couple different specific tools with you. And there are a bunch of them out there. I mean, there is Google Hangouts and Cisco WebEx and Join.me and Adobe Connect. There's a ton of different platforms, but I want to talk to you about two in particular. One is Microsoft Teams, which we talked about related to unified communications, and the other is Zoom. When you're evaluating any of these platforms, though, you want to look for two things. One is you want to look for on-the-fly meetings, communication, and collaboration that you can do internally. And you want to look at how you can do scheduled external meetings and communication and collaboration. So in other words, you want a video conferencing tool that both works with your team and with your clients. So Microsoft Teams, let me talk to you about the pros and cons of this. The pros of Teams is that, again, if you're already in the Microsoft ecosphere, you may already be paying for this anyway. Also, there's lots of collaboration options. You can do the screen share, you can do video, you can set up individual channels. So let's say you have multiple departments in your company, you can give each department their own channel that they can communicate on directly. Also, integrates incredibly with Outlook. If you're sending a calendar invite, with one click, you can turn that calendar invite into a Teams meeting that will send the person you're sending the calendar invite to, will send them a link that they can click to join the Teams meeting very, very easily. It can also integrate really well if you're an organization that utilizes Salesforce or SurveyMonkey or MailChimp. There's a lot of good integration with those applications that Teams has. And you can invite lots of people too. Like you can have 250 people max for audio and video. And I doubt many the companies joining us here today have more people than that in their companies. And then if you want to do even larger, like webinars or live events where you're broadcasting to a ton of people, you can go up to 10,000 people for that in their Teams live events. And the last one I'll mention for pros is just that, excuse me, it can replace your phone system, which is something that most of the other video conferencing tools cannot do. So you can truly have an all-in-one platform with Teams. The cons are that there's cost. If you want to add audio conferencing or if you want to turn it into your full phone system, there's going to be additional costs. It's not like those additional services are at the lowest levels of the licensing package that you may have already. But that's a pretty weak con. Honestly, it's not a significant con because you're going to be paying extra for those services anyway, but this way you can get them all in one package. All right, let's talk about Zoom. So as you've probably been hearing a ton about Zoom, they've been in the news partly because of how good their stock is doing, but also because they're just quality. The pros of Zoom is that it's very easy to create an individual account in Zoom. So if you're a sole proprietor, you can just set up an individual account very easily, or if you're corporate, you can set up an account very easily. And it doesn't have to be tied into like Google Apps or Microsoft or anything like that. And so it's a really flexible that almost any organization can use, big or small. Zoom has been an industry leader for a long time. And part of the reason is that they do a great job with their overall performance. There are less hangups, and bandwidth challenges with Zoom, partly because they have technologies that do a great job. I gave you the warning about the cough. I'm sorry. It might be psychosomatic now. I might be just coughing because I'm thinking about it. But they have technology with Zoom that will make it so that, let's say that you're on a weaker, you have weaker internet bandwidth than someone else on the other end of your video conference. It will actually calibrate down and throttle down the pixels in the video to be able to handle the whatever bandwidth level you're at. And it just does that really seamlessly, very smoothly. It's also really built well natively for webinars. I mean, we're using Zoom for this particular webinar, even though we use Teams at Mainstay for almost everything else. So webinars are really great. Although I say that, but Teams is coming out very, very quickly. They've been putting a lot of research and development and investment in this. And so I think in the future, we'll probably be using Teams for webinars as well. But that is an area where Zoom really shines. The cons for Zoom is that it's not, I mean, the con is the same as the pro. It's that it's not natively integrated with a lot of Microsoft products. So it doesn't have nearly the kind of flexibility or ease of use. If you're already in the Microsoft ecosphere, you're already using, Outlook and Outlook for calendar and those kinds of things. And the biggest one is it can't replace your phone system. So if ultimately you want to get to unified communications, you're not going to be able to get there with Zoom. I'll give you a quick bonus one in this voice category. There's an application that I'd encourage everyone to look at called Voxer, V-O-X-E-R. This is a mobile and desktop app for sending voice messages. And they even refer to it as like a walkie-talkie service. I think that belittles actually how helpful this tool is. But basically what you can do is you can send people up to 15-minute long voice messages. They can be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever. And they make it so that, there are times when, let's say you want to talk something through with someone or share something verbally with them, but your schedules aren't going to align to jump on the phone. Nor does it make sense to send an email because it would just take a lot longer to send an email. And so Voxer allows you to send these quick or long voice messages that someone can listen to at their own time when their schedule allows. And they can even listen to them at 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x playback speed so that, you can send a 10-minute message that they can listen to in 5 minutes. So it's a really great tool. We have used this a ton at Mainstay, and I would say even a lot of our progress as a company is due to Voxer because all the folks on our executive team, we utilize it for strategic planning, to be nimble and agile, to respond to client needs very quickly, and to be able to keep communication really tight and timely. You can also use a similar function if you have an iPhone. There's voice texting you can use an iPhone. The problem with that is it only works for other iPhone users and it's mobile only, whereas Voxer you can use with anyone regardless of the phone platform that they have, and you can access it via via a web browser, so you can listen to messages or send messages over using your laptop as well. All right, so now let's say you got the proper technology. It's not enough to have the proper technology. You have to have it secured as well. We are in an interesting situation right now where we have multiple security threats all converging at the same time. Organizations are playing fast and loose with security because they're navigating a bunch of change very rapidly. Individual users, who are always your number one security risk, now they're more likely to fall for social engineering tricks and phishing emails and so on when they're in a new environment and navigating a bunch of change. And home networks are not as secure oftentimes as business networks. And so, you put all those things combined, and the threat actors, the hackers, are having a field day. They're not taking time off in this. And so a lot of individuals and organizations are getting hit. So I want to give you some tips on how to navigate those waters in the coming weeks. First is you be utilizing multi-factor authentication. I shared earlier what multi-factor authentication is. Again, it's where you have a second factor or second form of authentication anytime that you enter, anytime that you are accessing sensitive data. So here's where you should layer multi-factor authentication around. I'll give you four things you should all layer on. One is bank accounts, whether those are business or personal. And if your bank doesn't provide you a multi-factor authentication option, you should honestly consider changing banks potentially, because it may be indicative of other security gaps that bank has. And obviously that's your money. It's easy to think of money as being, if you think of a $10 bill or $10, you think of a bill that has Alexander Hamilton's name on it. But the reality is that your money are ones and zeros sitting on a server. And if that data gets compromised, which can happen over the internet, then that money is gone. And so you really want to protect it with multi-factor authentication. Two is email. Sometimes people object and say, I don't want to have multi-factor authentication with the email because, you know, I open email so much. Man, if I have to enter a secondary code every time, that's going to drive me insane. But the good thing is that modern authentication practices for email will allow you to essentially only put that secondary code in the first time it's set up. And then it will cache, you could say, that secondary code for the rest of the time you use it. And the only time you'll need to enter a secondary code is when you log into a web browser, let's say. Let's say you don't have your, you're on vacation, you don't have your laptop, you log into your web browser and go to outlook.com. Then you'll have to enter that secondary code. But in terms of it being on your system, no, you won't have to re-enter it over and over again. And then VPN and remote access tools, like I had mentioned before. And then anywhere else sensitive data lives. If you have a line of business application that has a lot of sensitive medical information or financial information or whatever, then consider implementing multi-factor authentication in order to log into those applications. So that's important. Staff training is another one. Your users are your number one security risk. You can build the security walls really high, but then those users can open the doors and windows and leave them open, and all of those technical security controls aren't really that helpful. So the key is to get your team staff security training. Get them security awareness training. It should be part of their onboarding. It should be part of what they do as soon as they're hired. And then that training should be updated annually. If you're a sole proprietor, you should have some sort of training service that you're using that you have to take annually, and that you push yourself to spend an hour, hour and a half, make sure that you understand what the new threats are, how to respond to those threats appropriately. I'm going to give you kind of a quick one right now that you can pass on to your team as well. I'm going to give you some secure email best practices that you can share with your team. And again, if you email Corey, choy@mstech.com, he'll send you these full notes, and you can cut and paste these and send them along to your team. If you see any fishy emails, what you should do is a few things. One, consider hitting the reply button, but don't send, because if you hit the reply button, it will show you actually who the email is coming from. They may spoof who the sender is when you see it initially, but if you hit reply, it will show you what the actual address is. Also, hover over any links before you click any links in an email, because on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to see what those links are actually sending to, the websites that those links are actually sending to you, because those can be spoofed in the email as well. Also, just don't click on links if you don't need to. And you know what the number one link that you shouldn't click on in an email is the unsubscribe link. And I know that may come as a shock to many of you. Think that's the one that you should click in an email for security purposes. But actually, if there is going to be malware attached to a link in one of those emails, it's most likely going to be the unsubscribe, because that's the most likely link to get clicked. So instead of clicking unsubscribe, you mark that email as spam, and then that also has the side benefit of teaching your spam filter what to look out for. Also, don't click that download images button unless you know where that's coming from and you're sure that that's a safe sender. And then lastly, make sure you voice verify. This is one of the most important things for email security, is that it used to be, back in the day, that if you got an email, it was purported to be from your boss, but you just weren't sure it was actually from them. You could open up a new email, send an email to your boss's email address and say, hey, I got this weird email, was that from you? And they would say, oh no, it's not from me. Now, the problem is if you do that, the actual email account from your boss may be compromised. And so you're just going to get an email back saying, yes, that was me. Click on that link, click on that attachment. So what you have to do now is you have to call and say, hey, I just got an email. Was that from you? That's the only way to do it now, is to voice verify. Lastly, on the security piece here, is that all of you should be thinking not just about technical security layers, but about establishing what's called an information security program. Information security programs mean the rules of the road for your organization for how you should manage security, both for technical security layers, administrative security layers, and physical security layers. It should cover all three of those subcategories. And so in other words, it's not just enough to have a good firewall. It's not just enough to have some technical layers in place, but you need to have potentially ongoing risk assessments to understand where your security gaps are and how you can fill them. You need to have appropriate security policies and procedures. You need to have well thought through workflows for how you're sharing data internally and externally, and it needs to be clarity amongst your team for how all those workflows should function. You need to have appropriate user training, as we've been talking about. You should have phishing testing that should be layering on, where you're actually, or a third party is actually sending phishing emails that look like they're phishing emails and help your users to understand what they need to be looking for and what is safe. You need to have dark web monitoring, so you can be sure that there's not your passwords or domain accounts or whatever living somewhere where hackers are able to get to them very easily. And for those organizations that may be under compliances of different kinds, if you're under HIPAA or PCI compliance because you take credit cards or what have you, you need those compliances governed, meaning you need to make sure that those compliances are built into, the requirements there are built into the fabric of your business. And that's what having an information security program is all about. And last note on that, just realize that that's not a function of IT. A lot of times people think, oh, well, how am I doing with security? I'll ask IT. But that implies that somehow IT is the one who's going to make your organization secure. That's not true. And if your IT provider even frankly raises their hand and says, yeah, you're secure because you have a good firewall, or you have good antivirus, that does not mean you're secure. That means you may have some key technical security layers in place, but that has nothing to do with your administrative controls, your workflows, your user behaviors, or any of the other things that are really critical to being secure. So work with an information security provider, not an IT provider, but an information security provider, to establish a really solid information security program for your business. All right, last thing in the playbook, cultural intentionality. So here's the reality. Culture gets built whether you mean for it to get built or not, right? Your company culture is going to develop. And that company culture, even for those of you who are sole proprietors, you may think, well, we don't have a company culture. Company culture is just me. Well, even that is built intentionally, right? Like every way in which you interact with an individual, that's part of the company culture that's being built, and part of how sort of like the public brand that you have in the world is being shaped. And so we all need to develop a lot of intentionality around culture. Mainstay, we're really fortunate here. We have been named best companies to work for in New Hampshire 2 years in a row. Last year we were, this past year we were number 5 on the list. The year before we were number 7, so we're moving up the chain, hoping to hit number 1 at some point. And a lot of that just goes to the incredible team that we have. And so we're so fortunate and blessed by that. But part of it is we think a lot about culture, and we think about how culture is shaped. But the challenge is, in today's day and age, now that this has all happened, is that we don't have the physical environment. We can't shape the physical environment and have the same physical engagement with our teams that we normally have had. And so we're gonna have to be even more intentional about it now than ever before. So I wanna give you some recommendations around that. First is to check in with your team and hold them accountable, but not just for their end product, not just for what they deliver to clients or to the team, but instead hold them accountable and talk to them and check in with them about their work process. The process itself oftentimes is sort of dictated and shaped by the company culture that's developed in a physical office. When people start working remotely, though, they may not have all of those social cues to say, here's what this process should look like. Here's what it's like to have a healthy work environment. And so do things like encourage your team to have a dedicated separate workspace. Stay Work Play right now, Corey was mentioning this to me actually, that Stay Work Play has a like a hashtag called stay at home work and play, or something like that, stay home work and play, where people are submitting photos of their home workspaces. And most of those home workspaces don't look, excuse me, don't look like very permanent workspaces at all. There's just a laptop. There's no, let's say, external keyboard and mouse to use to make it more comfortable. There's often no multiple monitor screens to be able to make them more efficient. And sometimes it's like, someone's sitting at their, with their laptop on their lap, sitting on their couch. But that's not good. That's not good for people psychologically. It's not good for their efficiency. It's not good for their back. There's a lot of reasons why you want to have a really dedicated workspace that's, not just laying on your bed while you do the work. Talk to your team about implementing daily work routines and have that be a part of their work plan. It's not just children that thrive on routines and consistency. All of us do. I mean, even our health is tied to circadian rhythms and when we go to bed and when we get up. And so when you're talking to your team, ask them, what is the routine that you're establishing to keep that kind of consistency and healthiness? And then lastly on this one is just, we need to model this, especially if you're a business leader. We need to model this to our teams. And especially we need to model proper work to home shifts. Similarly, we need to model proper shift to home to work shifts. When you go to the office and then you come home, you have a very clear, okay, I'm at the office, I'm doing work. Now I'm home. Now I'm going to spend time with my family, or I'm going to work on hobbies, or I'm going to do this other thing. When you're working from home all the time, that can blend together very, very easily. And so we need to encourage our team to do things like change their clothes when they start their workday. Don't work in your pajamas. That maybe people may joke about that, how funny that is, but like, no, that's not good. That's not healthy. Maybe if you've been doing video conferencing, maybe I'm the first person you've seen in a couple of weeks to be wearing a white shirt. But ultimately, people should be, even if they're not wearing button-up shirts, but even if they're just changing from their pajamas to jeans and a polo shirt, something that says, this is a different part of my day. And then when they're done, they change into a t-shirt, that kind of thing. And also, even when we email our team is culture building, and can take away from those work to home shifts that really are going to be important for our teams in the coming days. So it's like if you, let's say, have to jump on your laptop and you have to send an email to someone at 8 p.m. First of all, if you don't have to do that and you should have your own work to home shifts, but let's just say you have to do that. Well, you can click the delay delivery button in Outlook and set it to where that email doesn't get sent to that team member until 8 a.m. the next day instead of 8 p.m., where that could create a dynamic where people start to feel like, oh, there's an expectation that I'm going to be working at night, and maybe that's even more of an expectation now that I can work from home and I don't have to commute. So we have to model this for our teams in order to create these positive work environments for our teams. Second category here is increase one-on-one and all team engagement. Our need for human connection is going to increase in all this, not decrease. And so, turn those quarterly staff meetings that you might have, turn them into monthly staff meetings, do them over video. Maybe it's even just the CEO, the president of the company. Maybe it's a one way, but everyone can see his face. Turn them into monthly meetings and just make them a little shorter. Or same thing, if you're checking with individual people on your team, and turn those one-on-ones from, monthly one-on-ones to weekly ones and just make them shorter, but also default to video. I know personally, I'm somebody who I never want to default to video historically because I don't want to put people on the spot, but we're going to need to see each other more than ever. And so set an expectation of the culture of your company now that now when you have to communicate with each other, default to utilizing video and keep those connections high, and using the video services that I talked about before. And especially if you utilize the unified communications platforms, that'll make that even easier. There's also a last tool I'll mention, which is called Yammer, Y-A-M-M-E-R. This is a Microsoft product that's basically, you could think of it like Facebook for your business, where it's more casual. It allows people to connect in a more casual manner, because some people don't want to be Facebook friends with people that they work with for various reasons. And so Yammer allows there to be that kind of water cooler conversation, you could say, that happens within the team, and keeps it less formal. So how can Mainstay help in this? Well, first of all, we can help you because we can be your IT provider. Our goal is to provide the services of an enterprise level IT department to small and medium-sized businesses. And so we do that in a really cost-effective, but yet very personal and integrated way for your business. And we're in a situation right now where just like, it's easy when times are good to tolerate ineffectual IT. When money's rolling in and you got plenty of clients and business is booming, and if you're not satisfied with your IT company, or you're not satisfied with your internal IT person or whatever, it's easy to just be like, well, not that big of a deal. But right now, jobs are, your business may be on the line, frankly, in this, and having the right tools and having the right support may make the difference between your business being able to stay open. Especially if like you're spending a lot of money on IT and you need to move and look to a company that's going to help you really think through this. Mainstay, we always try to make sure that our clients have solid technology standards and so on. But in times like these, IT providers like Mainstay need to be pivoting and helping stretch out and helping organizations tighten their belts and do more with less. And so if you're spending a lot of money on IT because you have it internally, or because you're just with a high cost provider, or just you're not satisfied. These are just the moments where you do not want to put up with and just let ineffectual IT stick around, because you may have your business at stake. There may be jobs at stake. I mean, literally, it may be that if you don't have the right tools and the right support, that you may have troubles in your business that require layoffs. And depending on the kind of business you're in, I mean, like quite literally lives could be at stake if you're in medical right now. And so we can help by being your IT department. Also, if you do have internal IT staff and your IT staff is killing it, doing great, but they just need some support because there's a lot of work to be done right now, we can help supplement them and support your internal IT department. And we have a team actually that works directly, specifically with internal IT departments that has different people, different workflows, different processes. So we tend to be a really highly liked provider by those because we have a separate workflows delivering that service just to internal IT people. We can also provide training, consulting on all the things that we talked about today, go deeper in any of those things. And we also have a managed information security services division. So all of what I had referenced before about helping with risk assessments, compliance governance, user security training, secure workflow development, all of that stuff we can do. So in other words, not just the technology side we can help with, but we can also help with all of the administrative and physical controls and help really ensure that you have a secure organization at a time really where it's more important than ever with so much of our infrastructure moving to the cloud and moving off site, employees not being physically in office. Security is more important than ever. And then of course we can do individual IT audits or security assessments. And you can obviously call anytime is also great as well. So what I'd like to do is just transition here to some questions and answers. So this is a great opportunity if you have a question to type it in. I'll also mention as well that, you know, I mentioned before that if you want the notes for this, email the Corey Hoyt, choyt at mstech.com, and he will send you those notes directly. And also, if you have any other feedback for us on other webinars that you'd like to see during this time, you know, maybe there's a certain part of what we shared today that you'd like to see us dive into more deeply. Maybe it's the culture part or certain parts of the technology or certain security elements. Whichever, we can put that together. We'd love to hear from you on what would be most valuable and provide any feedback, pro or con. You can also share any of that feedback with Carmen at the Chamber directly or anyone at the Chamber for ideas that you might have on other events we can put on, other webinars, other trainings. So I don't know whether I just did such an amazing job answering any potential questions that you might have, but there's no open questions that were put in. So, you know, if you've just thought of a question but feel weird about sending it out, you know, you don't want to raise your hand virtually here, I understand. Feel free to just reach out to Corey and we can get any of those answers to you. So I really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much again to Carmen and to the folks at the Chamber for putting this on. And, you know, we're a local company. We're independently owned here at Mainstay. We don't have any outside investors or people that don't live directly in this area. So we'd love to work with small businesses through this process and help anyone that we can to establish. Sorry, I got distracted by a question that did come in. Yeah, I'll close my thought in a minute, but let me answer this question. So someone asked, thank you so much for presenting this information. And are there different levels within Zoom that creates different opportunities that we should know about? So yes, there are different licensing levels in Zoom. So you can start with a free account in Zoom that will allow you to have like host meetings that go up to 100 participants, that you can do a lot of one-on-one meetings. One of the challenges with a free account is that it limits it to 40 minutes, which is a bummer. And, you know, most meetings are going to go oftentimes longer than 40 minutes. So that's not really ideal. This is also where Teams is an advantage there because you don't have those time limitations for Teams. If you go up to the Pro structure, it's $14.99 a month per individual license per person. That will allow you to have much longer meetings. You know, duration of theirs is 24 minutes. And then you can get a bunch of different individuals. So it's not, you don't have the you don't have the limitation on individuals. And then it keeps going up from there. If you want to do webinars, it depends on then what size webinars you want to do. We recently did a webinar that had hundreds of people in it, and we had to increase our platform itself or our licensing. But again, what I would also recommend anyone who's utilizing Teams now to really consider, or utilizing Zoom or Cisco WebEx or one of those other platforms, to really consider utilizing Teams. They're doing a ton of R&D, really some great stuff coming out of there. One of the cool innovations, for instance, that they're developing that should be rolled out, I think actually maybe within the next week or two, is a noise canceling technology that utilizes artificial intelligence to cancel out any voices that are not your own. So basically it will understand which voices are yours. And so if you have someone behind you, if kid talking in the background, or if you're a nurse and you've got people behind you at the nurses station, it will cancel out all of those noises. Or, if you got paper crumpling, or you cough, whatever, it'll cancel those noises out automatically, and will create a much, smoother. You can prevent the CNN type of mishaps where everyone can hear in the meeting your dog barking and kids running in the room and all of that. So really strongly recommend any of you to look at Teams as an option if you're already using Zoom. So just to close up, again, we love working with local organizations, so don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I hope all of you stay very safe and well, and continue to adapt to this crazy world we're living in, and adapt fast, hopefully, so that we can, get through this, go down underneath the storm, as it were, like in a submarine, and come out on the other side even stronger. So thank you again, and bless you all. Take care.